Hello everyone. This practice was created for you, those of you who are on my newsletter mailing list. As you know, I send out a newsletter once a week, usually on a Tuesday, and they're almost always just text newsletters. Occasionally I'll send a video here and there. So today I thought I would do just that, create a short practice for you so that you can get a taste of what we do in our virtual studio. Today's practice will focus on spinal segmentation. Sometimes we also call that articulation. And so we're going to be playing around with different positions and different familiar poses or movements that you might find in a yoga class, but just through a little bit more focused lens. So we'll look at things like bridge pose, tabletop position, a kneeling position, and it's really important to remember that your spine isn't just one piece. And what can tend to happen in certain movement practices or even yoga or just in our daily lives is our spine tends to move in one or two big chunks. And we have lots of joints in the spine. So the better we can get those individual segments to function, the better overall resilience our spine will have. So let's get started. Come onto your back with your knees bent. And you can arrange your arms however you'd like. Adjust until you're satisfied with this position. And if you feel like you need to fidget and move a little bit, that's okay, but if you're comfortable in stillness, let's do that so that we can really connect to the sensation of our breath. Notice how it's flowing. Observe the most obvious places of expansion when you inhale. If you're getting a lot of movement up in your high chest or even up into your shoulders or neck, just be aware of that and notice if you could intentionally expand a little bit deeper into your torso, a little bit lower. And then if you're feeling a lot of movement just in your belly, try to expand outward to the sides. Belly is still going to inflate, of course, but that's because your diaphragm is lowering down to make space in your thorax for your inhale breath. Now spend a few breaths trying to expand into your back. Feeling your rear rib cage a little bit firmer in towards your yoga mat. Try to put all of those four directions together so that you're feeling equal expansion in the front side, the right side, the left side, and the back side of your body with every inhale that you take. This expansion creates what we call intra-abdominal pressure. And intra-abdominal pressure, otherwise known as IAP, is a way to stabilize or create decompression in your spine column. Let's move on to a little bit of movement with our pelvis. The idea here is to keep everything else pretty still and to start to tip and tuck the pelvis. And just a little bit of anatomical reference for you. As we tip the pelvis forward, we call that our anterior tilt. And when you do that movement, your lower back might curl off the floor slightly. The posterior pelvic tuck is when the lower back gets a little closer to the ground and it feels like our tailbone is going to curl up in between our thighs. Let's go really slow on this. See if you can move like a sloth so that you can feel each degree of movement in your pelvis. I like to think of the pelvis like a bowl. And right now we're just kind of tipping the bowl forward into that anterior tilt so the contents kind of slosh towards our thigh bones. And then we can tip the pelvis backwards and pour the contents of the bowl towards our ribs. Let's do 2 more like that. Rocking on the bottom of the bowl. As you move your pelvis, notice that the lower back will also translate that movement. But we can do that movement without moving our neck or our upper back or our rib cage. Let's create the effort of that posterior tuck once again. So try to imprint your lower back closer to the ground, and for some of you it might even be touching the ground. That's cool. And then press your heels down. So think of putting your footprint into your yoga mat. Keep curling your tailbone up between your thighs. And then see if you can lift just the very lowest part of your spine, which is your tail and maybe a little bit of your sacrum. Keep your lower back connected. Keep tucking, keep curling, and lift up just 1 inch higher. Lower back is still on your mat. Keep your low back sticky towards the floor, but maybe just lift 1 or 2 of those lowest vertebrae. So you're barely lifting into this super low bridge pose. And hopefully we're feeling a sense of support here from the backs of our hips with our glutes and even into those hamstrings. If you want a little bit more hamstring engagement, think of also dragging your heels back towards your body. Let's come up just a little bit higher, maybe another 1 or 2 vertebrae. Stay connected to the back side of your rib cage here. So maybe the whole low back is just barely hovering off the ground. Come up just a little bit more. And think of moving each joint in the spine, 1 vertebra, so that each layer is independent from the last. Slowly unstick your spine from your yoga mat until your hips come a little higher. This particular bridge is not about a back bend. It's more about hip extension. So let's feel the work around the hips. You can sense a little bit of a squeeze of your inner thighs towards each other. Stay connected to your feet. And then maybe you come up to what feels like a good spot to land in your bridge today. We want to get to a point where we're feeling a little bit of fatigue around the seat, but you don't have to crack a nut with your glutes. Okay, so there is engagement there, but you don't have to squeeze with all of your might. Think more just about lifting the hips and let the glutes do their thing. And then we'll start to travel down just as slow as we went up. Start at the rib cage area, 1 or 2 segments at a time. And just try to see that in your mind's eye, even if you can't connect to it physically. I like to use the analogy of pieces of Velcro, those little loops of material sticking together 1 segment at a time, just like your spine is, connecting back down onto the floor. Keep it controlled. Down 1 inch, low back is getting closer to the ground here. You're still trying to curl your tailbone off the ground though, still kind of tucking under. Lower back is starting to feel the floor all the way. Back of the pelvis lands. Keep the tuck until your sacrum is all the way down. And then relax. Take a moment. Phew. You're probably feeling things on the back side of your body. That's good work. So what you could do from here is pause the video and do 2 to 3 more of those or even more. And we did that super slow, right? So you wouldn't have to do it that slow every time, but let's think about getting away from 1 breath per movement with this type of focused work. That doesn't really add anything that I know of physiologically. It's more of a spiritual or an energetic practice to vinyasa your way through movement. But if that's something that you do frequently, this is a nice change for both your body and your nervous system. Okay, so we're gonna change things up a little bit and we're gonna come on down to a prone position. So you're just gonna roll over onto your stomach. And for this particular exercise, we're gonna try to take the arms out of it a little bit, but still give you a little bit of connection to your scapula, because scapula does help with upper body extension. So let's bring either the forehead or the chin to the floor and take our arms behind us. And let's go palms facing upward. So thumbs in, pinkies out. And then let's come back to this idea of the posterior tuck. So you can probably feel some wrinkles in your shirt back here in your low back. Let's try to smooth out those wrinkles by creating the effort of a posterior tuck, like trying to take your pubic bone into your mat or tuck your tail between your legs. And then let's just work the neck into a little bit of extension. Lift your chin, look forward. Keep your chest heavy. Forehead or chin kisses the mat again. And then you'll once again extend through your neck. So we have very good mobility in this plane of movement in the cervical spine. Sometimes so much so that we're disconnected from thoracic extension, which is a harder movement to create just because the way our back is shaped. So let's stay in a little bit of neck extension, but still think of holding a grapefruit or a large ball between your chin and your chest. So you don't want to drop the ball by lifting your chin too high. And then hover your arms off the floor. Keep tucking your tail underneath you and think of squeezing your shoulder blades in towards your spine. Your hands don't actually have to get closer to each other. It just happens at the level of the shoulder. Now peel your shoulders a little higher and start to roll your chest forward as you keep that energy in your pelvis as it tucks. Try to peel your chest off the floor, 1 inch at a time, and then take your gaze forward. Now we're going to try to come down from the bottom, the ribs, the sternum, middle sternum, top sternum, and then let the arms rest and bring your forehead down. Let's try it again. Look forward slightly. Drop your tail. Try to keep it out of your low back for as long as you can. Hover your arms. Hug your shoulder blades towards your spine. Top of the sternum leaves the floor first. Contract your upper back. Keep reaching your fingertips back. And then a little bit at a time, raise the chest as high as it'll go. Look forward. And then slowly lower down. Now, if you wanted a few more of these, you could play around with different arm positions. Probably the most simple version is the one that we just did with the arms behind us, because that scapular retraction contributes to spine extension. If you really wanted to challenge yourself with a different activation in the shoulders, you could play around with arms to a T, arms to a V, or arms reaching overhead, which would be probably the hardest progression that you could come up with there. The other option would be to take the hands behind the head. Elbows can come out wide, or they could squeeze in a little bit. Notice how changing the position of your arms changes the experience of your spine extension. Let's press back to tabletop. And then you can just sit back on your heels for a moment. I wanted to clarify one thing that I just said. With the hands behind the head, elbows wide or elbows forward. It's not that one of those things is better than the other, so it's not a matter of right or wrong, which sometimes we hear a lot of that in yoga, like do it this way, this is the safe way, this is the right way. And what I found in my studies is that there's rarely just one right way to do things. In fact, our brains and our bodies love variation, and doing the same thing the same way all the time is not helpful, hardly in any situation. We need to mix it up. So try things different ways. Notice what changes, and your body and your brain will thank you. Okay, next up, we're gonna come into a really familiar shape and movement, which is our cat and cow. So for a few rounds, do your cat-cow the way you always do it. So if you breathe a certain way or you have your hands set a certain way, you're just gonna kind of roll with that. Maybe you're doing the 1 breath per movement like we do in a lot of yoga classes, especially the vinyasa classes. And then let's take a little bit of a rest for our wrists. Perhaps we move the wrists into a little bit of flexion to counter the extension you were just in, and stretch both sides of the wrist as well as activate the muscles that move the wrist. And then we'll come back to tabletop. We'll explore cat-cow in a different way now. So your foundation is subjective. You could have your hands out in front of you a little bit more. You could bring your wrists directly under your shoulders. This just means it's going to change the sensation and the load on your wrists and shoulders. So this position here, less load in wrist extension. This lengthens the lats a little bit, so you may not have as much control in some of your spinal movements. So play around with that. If you always do it one way, be sure you're testing out other methods. So find your level so you know where that is. And then we're just gonna keep the upper body level while we start to tip and tuck the pelvis, just like you did on your back. Anterior, posterior tuck, back and forth. When you tip your pelvis forward, your lower back is gonna wrinkle up a little bit into extension. And then when you tuck your tail under, that low back is gonna stretch out. 2 more times. Now we're gonna find the effort of pressing the hands to the ground at the same time as we're trying to pull our hands towards our knees and our knees towards our hands. And then we're gonna find that posterior tuck. Keep that pulling sensation of the hands and the knees, like you're trying to wrinkle up your mat, and take your pelvis into an anterior tilt. Try not to do too much in the upper back. I just caught myself doing cat pose and cow pose with my upper back. Let's try it again. Tuck just the pelvis under. Keep your upper back straight. Pull with your hands. And now tip your pelvis forward. Keep pulling with your hands. Don't change your upper back. And then take a little rest. I'd be curious to know what you felt around your core container when you added in that little dragging back effort with your hands. Okay, let's move on to the upper back now. Just set your foundation how you like it. You don't have to add in the pulling effort just yet. So level everything out, find your base neutral. And now let's think of moving from the sternum. Shoulder blades like to help a lot with this movement, so let's see if we can keep it just in the spine. Lift the top of your sternum, the portion closest to your chin. Try to pull that forward through your arms. Contract your upper back just like you did on your belly, but don't let your pelvis tip forward. With the bottom of your sternum now, you're going to try to pull that in towards your spine and create that cat shape, the dome in your upper back. Don't let the pelvis tuck. Last thing that's going to move is the head, so you can really tuck your chin and look back behind you. Let's try it again. Top of the sternum pulls forward through your arms. Think of widening across your collarbones. And if your shoulders want to help, try to get them to do that at the very last moment. So you can squeeze your shoulder blades together as you pull your heart through your arms. Bottom of the sternum tries to tuck in towards your spine as you create that flexion in just your upper back. Find cat pose. Tuck your chin, spread your shoulder blades wide across your back. And then we'll take another little rest. Get off of your hands, give it a little shake, shake. Okay, we're gonna put together those 2 movements, and we're gonna add in a little bit of variation with the effort of pulling and pushing with the arms and the hands. Notice what you feel along the side seam of your body when you do that. And also notice any of your natural core response. So try not to squeeze your belly in consciously. Notice what happens as you start to move your spine and create different efforts with the arms. Find neutral. We're going to move segmentally here, so your head will be the last thing to move. Begin by lifting your tailbone up and letting your pelvis pour forward. Think of pulling your hands towards your knees and your knees towards your hands. Let your belly get a little closer to the floor, create more extension in your spine. Start to lift your sternum forward. Keep pulling with your arms. Very last thing, gaze flicks forward. This is your spine extension. This is your cow pose. Arms nice and straight. Now let's keep the gaze forward and the chest up for as long as we can, okay? And you're gonna start to push your hands down and imagine you're trying to stretch your mat forward. Drop your tailbone. Start to tuck through your pelvis. Bottom of the sternum comes in towards your spine. And now we're creating cat pose in the upper back. Very last thing, head drops. Tuck your chin. We're gonna go the other way again and we're coming back to the pull. So push your palms down and at the same time think of dragging them to your knees. Start to lift your tailbone. Keep looking down with your head, don't let your head lift yet. Tip your pelvis all the way forward. Extend into your lumbar, keep pulling with your hands. Top of the sternum is starting to pull through the arms. We're creating that global spine extension. Then we move into the neck. The head gaze is forward. Now think of pulling your mat in half, stretching. Tuck your tail. Keep your chest forward as long as you can. Dome your lower back first, mid back, upper back. Drop your head. Now we rest. Give your wrists a little love. Some rotations or just a little forearm massage perhaps. Finger flicks always feel good for me. Notice what you notice. Where are you feeling some muscular activation or a sense of fatigue or just a sense of being awake and aware in certain areas of your body? It's a lot of the yoga practice, right? Just paying attention. Not just making shapes to make them, but noticing your sensory awareness when you're in those shapes. Well, let's move on. We're going to come up to a half kneeling position. So some people might call this a low lunge, but it's a little different than a lunge because we're not going to let the hips press forward over this back leg. So step your right foot forward. And if being on your knee like this is tender or uncomfortable, you can pad your knee in some way. So the idea here is to get your left thigh vertical, hip and knee in the same line. And then we're once again going to play around with the pelvis and the low back. So just the tuck and the tilt. As you tuck under, you're going to fire your glutes a little bit more. And then as you tip forward, reach that tailbone back. As you tip your pelvis forward, kind of targeting the spinal extensors in the lumbar area. And as we tuck under with the pelvis, we have both the energy of the front core contracting and the back of the hip contracting. So we have really good support on both sides. Try it again, tip forward. Think of scissoring your legs together here. And then tuck under. Keep the tuck under, please, and reach your arms out in front of you. Let's create cat pose now. Global spine flexion, like you're doing a core crunch. Shorten the space between your pelvis and your lowest ribs. Reach your arms further away from you. And then at the very last moment, when you think you've reached your max here, we're gonna squeeze the glutes and pull the hips forward just a little bit, just like an inch. And you might feel an especially nice stretch in your left hip flexor. Flexors, I should say. And then reverse out of that, find neutral position. For a little rest here, you might wish to just take a downward dog to kind of open up the backs of the knees a little bit. or if child's pose is better for you, let's just take some time in recovery. Coming back to your 360-degree breath expansion, feeling that equal pressure system create spine decompression on the inhale breath. And then we'll switch sides. Left leg will step forward, the right knee will stay underneath the hip. So our right thigh is nice and vertical like a fireman's pole. Play around with the pelvis just a couple times. We've done this now multiple times. It's kind of a nice thing to revisit in different positions to see how it goes. Back contracts when we tip the pelvis forward. The front core contracts and the back core contracts as we tuck under. Yes, your glutes are part of your back core. A couple more. Next time you find yourself in that tuck under with the tush, activate that little scissor effect with your legs, like you're trying to wrinkle up your mat there between your front heel and your back knee. Arms will come out ahead of you, or you could take your arms a little bit over your head and see how that changes your experience of spinal flexion. Start to flex. Pull your front body into your back body. Create that doming shape in your whole spine. Keep the work of the right glutes, extending your right hip. And then pull your hips forward just a wee bit, but try not to lean forward in your spine. Breathing. And then release back to neutral. Take your child's pose, your kneeling pose, or your downward facing dog if you prefer it. And then we're going to come back to one last version of cat-cow. And we'll create some lateral flexion before we start to move into flexion and extension. So instead of having your wrists straight ahead of your knees, you're going to walk your hands to the right so that your spine is flexed laterally towards the right. So this right side shortening a little bit. You don't have to overly contract there. Try to keep your hips facing forward. A little bit longer on the left side of your spine now. And then let's think of moving like a wave through our spine, so it's not just moving in one piece. Let's start at the tail. Lower back, mid back, upper back pulls through, and then the eyes look forward or upward. Start the same way. Start at the tush, drop it under. Lower back, mid back, upper back, head. Maybe just one more on this side. You could go slightly faster, but still pay attention to each segment. See if each bone can move independently from its neighbor. And then we'll go the other way. Set the hands off to the left. And I should have mentioned before, we do want to keep the hands about shoulders width. Sometimes what'll happen when I teach this is people will bring their hands together when they come off to the side. You're going to keep that same width of your foundation and just change the angle between the lower body and the upper body. Let's try for two really slow articulating cat-cows. You could also play around with taking this wave from the head and moving towards the pelvis so that the pelvis moves last. I will say I feel like that is a progression. It's a little bit harder to find for most folks, but go ahead and try it if you want to. Last time for a short little break. Choose a position that feels comfortable, one that you can breathe easily in. And bring your mind's attention back to the rhythm of your breathing. Can you breathe a little bit more into your backside? A little bit more into your sides? Possibly less high chest movement. Follow your breath all the way in and all the way out. Be very patient with your exhales so that they trickle out real slow. No need to rush that. I hope you've enjoyed this practice. I'd love for you to let me know what you think of this, and I'll try to do one of these every so often. But as I said before class, this particular practice would be very similar to our Monday mobility snack, which is at noon on Arizona time. If you feel like you just don't want to commit to a subscription product where you're billed every month, I do have options where you can just purchase a single class and take it with me live. The benefit of having the virtual studio membership is that you don't have to be present at the live class. The classes are recorded, they're uploaded to both Facebook and YouTube so that you can watch them when your schedule allows for it. I do have tiered pricing depending on your ability to commit to a certain level of payment, and if neither of those two versions work for you, please reach out to me and give me some ideas on what might work for you. Thanks so much for practicing. Bookmark this. You can practice it any time that you want. It's not going to go anywhere. And reach out to me if you have any questions. Thanks so much.